and welcome back to another episode of Index Office Hours. Today is the 2nd of August, and it is 𝗨𝘀𝗃𝗃. Welcome, everyone. So, if you are new to Index Office Hours, we love participation, and we are in this stage chat format. So, if you would like to voice your opinion, please feel free to do so in the chat box to the top right corner, or unmute your mic when we are in the open discussion phase. This will be recorded onto YouTube, so please bear that in mind in case you are worried about having your face and voice on the remarks, as we like to do, is going to be about GRTIQ. So this week's episode was 75 with Joel and Rob, and I thought it was interesting. They were discussing the research that was done by the both of them, and that research was around tools of thought. This subject for me is very interesting because when you are trying to do research or understand some field in order to innovate upon it, you use different tools to record your discoveries and kind of expand your thought. And so this conversation that was explored via GRTIQ was a very almost academic, philosophical one about how the tools that we use help us synthesize knowledge, and how sometimes those tools can limit the thinking based on the way that they're designed. And so if anyone is interested in the world of tools of thought, I'd highly recommend listening to that particular episode. It's a very interesting one. So with that, I will hand over to Anna to take us into Repo Watch.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our regular segment of Repo Watch. As always, you'll find all links to release notes and PRs in the agenda link, which has been posted. And I won't mention any releases that haven't happened this week. So with that, let's start with our major blockchain clients. And here we have had for 𝗨𝗃𝗀𝗀, we have had a new release, so 22.07.04 alpha, which I'm not going to go through just because it contains a lot of fixes and bugs, bug fixes, and it is maintenance release. So check out the details in the agenda, but everything is just maintenance stuff. Then on Get, we have had a new release, version 1.10.21. This has a lot of changes, so again, check the agenda, but some of the things that you should be aware of. DNS discovery is now enabled for the Sepolia testnet. Puppet and PyEat app can no longer be used because those clients are no longer actively maintained. So if you're still using them, make sure you change that or you don't use them anymore. The engine API can no longer perform block insertion while the client is snap syncing. The engine API endpoint auth RPC is now enabled by default. And another point to mention, the HTTP RPC server will no longer hang on shutdown even when very busy connections. So another fix there. This release is also built on Go 1.18.4, and I would like to ask anyone if they have tried this new Get release or the 𝗨𝗃𝗀𝗀 release, and what kind of experiences you've had with it, please.
Just a question. Is there really anyone using Geth right now? Because there's so many downsides to using Geth as opposed to 𝗨𝗃𝗀𝗀 right now that it really doesn't make sense to be running Geth.
I know we're not. Yeah, I think the Geth probably doesn't make much sense unless you're planning on running the fire hose, because at least today the fire hose is only instrumented on, or rather Geth is only instrumented with the fire hose instrumentation.
Oh, yikes. Was there a reason for doing this?
I can't speak for the Streaming Fast team. I think they started with Geth because that was the reference client, and many of the high throughput chain forks that we've seen have forked from Geth. I know that instrumenting Aragon has been on their radar for some time, but I don't know what priority level it is. But I would agree that it would certainly be preferential for us.
Yeah, especially if we want to move to using Firehouse defaults and everything. Yeah, we would need to have Aragon, because like nobody really wants to have like 12 terabytes of Ethereum data. I would rather have those 12 terabytes of BSC or whatever.
I think Alex said he was working on instrumenting it and that they're expecting a release soon. I don't know what that means though.
That's nice.
Yeah, so for Firehose, there is the get-based stuff that is in there. But just to clarify, when you run Firehose, your instrumented client doesn't need to be an archive. I see this returning from time to time. This is not correct. Firehose runs a full node under the hood, not an archive node. Of course, for chains like Ethereum, BSC, Polygon, where the add calls are possible in subgraphs, you do need an archive node to handle those, but it doesn't need to be the Firehose base, so to say. So I haven't tried this as such, but you should be able to combine Firehose and where you need an archive node to let it connect to an Aragon archive node. So we do use get in Firehose, but only as a full node.
Thank you for specifying that, Cohen. And on the Aragon side, has anyone tried the new version? Okay,
I was going to try it, but not with Ethereum.
Okay.
We're probably going to upgrade to it this week.
Let us know how it goes. On the so on Streaming Fast Get, we have a new release. So Get version 1.10.20 Firehose 2.2, and that's all we have on the major blockchain client. On the indexer stack, on the graph stack, we have a new release of Graph Node. I have added all of the details of the release. However, I won't cover them just because we have Adam and Eva who will cover them later on in the episode. But you can see all of the nodes as notes of the release as reference. On in this indexer service and agent, we haven't had any new releases. And with that, I will hand over to Juan.
Thanks, Anna. So for Protocol Watch, we have a few things to cover. First, with forum governance, we have two requests for information about disputes updates. Both of them are progressing nicely. There's some new data that's been, I guess, it's been researched as to what's the main issue with the POI diversions, but nothing scary, thankfully. Then going into forum research, we have no new updates since last IOH. For the contracts repository, we have a bunch of closed PRs, but a few open PRs. One of the open PRs is a draft for the L2 testnet branch. Then we also have a chore, which is basically adding end-to-end tests to the GitHub workflows. And then we have a bunch of the closed PRs that we already covered in previous IOHs. And going into the network subgraphs, we have a small update for both the core network subgraph and the analytics subgraph so that we can accommodate for the new girly testnet, basically adding new workflows to deploy to those hosted service versions. But that's about it. That's all for Protocol Watch, and I'll handle it out to Abel for the open discussion.
Thank you, Juan. So today's open discussion can be broken down into two pieces. The first section is all about GraphNode. As Anna mentioned, there is a new release, and luckily we have Eva and Adam to discuss with us today about that particular release. And as was done earlier today, we've released all the notes and have asked everyone here to review the notes and come up with potential questions that you have. And so we'll have that discussion there. And then for the second part of today's open discussion, we have Ford, and Ford will be with us and discussing the action queue, telling us a bit about what it is, and fingers crossed, also demoing if we can make that possible. So that's the agenda for the open discussion. And with that, I will hand it over to Adam and Eva to take it away with the GraphNode.
So basically, we finally had a new release. It's been a while since the last one. A lot of new changes came in. Like a few don't affect that much indexers because they're features that are not supported in the network yet, like rweave, and we also had the rename for Tendermint to Cosmos. But yeah, we had a bunch of new features, and yeah, I don't know, we can go over a few of them. Yep. I can drop on the chat the link to the release notes if no one has seen. But we have things like store. Like right now, we have like a pipeline of the store right before like every. I think you can basically set an environment variable that sets how many writes the store can do in parallel for each subgraph or something like this. I can double check how exactly it works. We also have a new API version that allows for subgraph developers to access the receipts from the event handlers. We have a new GraphMan command for fixing a block, which I think sometimes a provider can give a block that stops the indexing for some reason because it has some wrong, like some data that is incorrect. You can basically fix the block for, like, use this command to delete that block from the cache and then fetch it again. But yeah, there are a lot of things. I also have written there notes about the environment variables. I think Kai and a few people mentioned problems with those. One of them seems to be solved because, just giving like a bit of a context here, we had a major refactor of the environment variables. They were all scattered around the code base, and Filippo fixed that for us. And they're more strict now, I think. Like you tried to talk again, Adam? Sorry, I don't know if... Yeah. So, and Kai shown, like he sent me an example that he might have found like a bug, and we're double checking, but like with the environment variable parsing. But besides that, everything is noted on the upgrade notes.
Just a quick thing to add. I wasn't paying attention to everything that you were saying, Eva, but like people that are using the 𝗨𝘀𝗃 build, just keep in mind that you need to remove the quotes from the Docker Compose YAML file if you're planning to switch to the latest version on the full text search environment variable. So if you're currently upgrading without without deleting the quotes from full text search true inside the Docker Compose YAML, the GraphNode will crash. So yeah, just a heads up.
Yeah, but do we have documentation as to which environment variables are Booleans only, and what the permitted values are?
I don't, like, we do have a documentation file on environment variables that is, I'm gonna send a link that is on the repo itself. Environment. This one, I'm gonna send it on the chat. Sorry, I sent also like a link to the thing that Payne just mentioned on the 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗪 build. But the latest message is about the environment variables documentation. It doesn't cover all of the variables. I think like to check them all, we like right now, since it's more organized, there we have like a env crate. Let me send you a link. So right now, all of the environment variables sit here on this folder. Like this is the code itself. If they're not documented on the markdown file, they can be found here. But perhaps we can improve the documentation and document every single one of them. I think some of them are not documented because they're very specific to something. I don't know if know much about the history, if like maybe we need it for the hosted service or I don't know. But the main ones are, which you guys probably are interested in, they're either documented there on the markdown file, and on the release notes, I've made a whole section that most of the items are about the environment variable changes.
Got it. Thanks.
I do seem to have run into an issue on my testnet setup when I upgraded. It seems like the indexing is still going fine, but querying and also doing some things like trying to rewind are giving me a store error. And I think it's probably related to some of the migrations that I saw were happening on upgrade. So I think that might need to get looked into.
I think we only have one migration for this release, so I can take a look at what happened with like the error message you posted. But yeah, it shouldn't be a problem. I can investigate on that.
For sure, thank you.
Any other questions in relation to GraphNode?
Yeah, when is going to be recommended for the network? Like how the process is going to happen? Like, do we need people to like test it on testnet first, or I don't know.
That's a great question. I was talking with Leo about this because like before we used to post, like we used to see if a few indexers can test it, and then later we can change on the networks MD file. I've made a PR for it, but I don't think we should merge it yet. But I don't think we have like a full process for that. I'm gonna definitely chat with Adam and with the team to see what's the best way to handle this. So it's more clear like when people should, like everyone should upgrade it, or who can help with finding bugs like this and like the environment variable one. But yeah, that's basically it.
All right, thank you.
I think Adam is probably trying to chat and say something, and it's not working.
All right, so basically only when networks.md is updated, then people should upgrade on the network to this version. If you upgrade prior to that and you get to sync and close one of those spec version 005 subgraphs, then you get slash, right?
Yeah, that's what Adam wrote there. on the chat.
All right. Cool.
Thanks for being the voice of him.
Amazing. So this is the final call in case anyone else has any other questions in relation to GraphNode. Please do interrupt. If not, then I will take this opportunity to hand it over to Ford, who's going to take us into the action queue. I just posted a message. He posted into Stage Chat, just here for visibility. Please do check it out. It has a bunch of links. And with that, Ford, take it away.
Cool. Thanks, Abel. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Awesome. Okay, so the action queue is a big new feature and a change in how the indexer agent works that was merged a few weeks ago. I've been testing it pretty actively on testnet and with our backstop indexers. And for me, at least, it's been a pretty huge improvement in usability and control over the indexer. So while I give a little bit of background, maybe in the chat, we can do a quick vote on who has some familiarity already with the feature to help guide this discussion. Thanks, Abel. Yeah, so just a background on how it works. So what I've done now with the indexer agent is I've decoupled the decision making of the agent and the execution of those decisions. So when the indexer agent is going through pulling data from the subgraph, looking at the network and seeing what subgraph deployments are there, comparing those with your indexing rules and deciding what actions to take, the indexer agent now makes that decision and adds that action into a queue, which we're calling the actions queue. And it will continue to work as it does in the existing setup, looping through the data, adding actions to the queue. But instead of just making that decision and then immediately taking the action, it's putting it into the queue, and there's a separate process that picks up items from the queue and executes them. So now we have different management modes that you can choose from. So if you were to decide to use the auto management mode, that would act just as it does right now. The agent would decide on an action and then pretty much take it immediately, automatically. And then we have a few new management modes that give you more control. So one of them that I think most indexers will like to use pretty heavily is the oversight management mode. In this mode, the indexer agent adds items to the queue, but it does not take any actions unless you approve them. So the workflow there would be the agent would be making decisions, adding them to the queue based on your rules. And then depending on your workflow, you can go in and check maybe daily, weekly, and see what items are in the queue, go through all those items, make sure those are actually actions that you want to execute, and then approve them, and then those actions will be taken. So that gives you some nice control and oversight over what the agent is doing. Whereas in the past, I know some indexers would do things like not load up ETH onto the agent just to make sure it can't take actions, other kind of hacks to have some oversight. This will give you explicit oversight over actions and require your approval before anything is taken. So that's a usability improvement. But the other big improvement that we get there is that because actions will batch up and accrue before being taken, we can take all those actions at once in a single transaction. And what we're doing here is using what's called multi-call, which was a pretty recent addition to the staking contract. And that allows us to batch arbitrary calls from the staking contract into a single transaction. And this will give us pretty big gas usage improvements. So I've created a subgraph that's tracking this on Rinkeby to help quantify what the gas usage improvements are. And I linked that in the chat. Abel shared that there. So take a look if you're interested in looking at actual numbers. They're pretty significant on some of the biggest bundled transactions. I was able to get a 60% reduction in gas usage. So that should have a pretty big impact on your indexer profitability. Maybe I'll stop there after giving that background and give you guys a chance to ask any questions, clarification. No questions. Okay. I have a quick demo I can do to show. Let's see if I can share my screen here. It's my first time doing that here.
If you haven't given your Mac permissions to share your screen, might not work, and you have to restart.
Oh, I see. Yeah, it's taking me to preferences now.
Yep, and then it will make you restart Discord, and then you'll be able to share your screen. Just Mac things.
Okay, so I can do that. Does everyone want to see a demo? Is there more points of discussion we want to go through here? I don't think there's any questions coming up.
I definitely would like to see a demo.
Yeah, +1 to that.
I've
even
seen
though
it,
I played
but
with
nobody
it.
else does.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. I'll be back in a minute then. Fingers crossed.
Awesome. Sounds good. Everyone loves a good demo. I can see a bunch of people chatting in the chat. Good stuff. Good stuff. There's also a link to a YouTube link in the links that I posted that demos parts of the action queue from a couple of it's a long time now, almost a couple of weeks, couple of months. Time flies from the graph hack. So if you guys want to check that out, feel free to. Looks like Ford's back.
Hey, Al. Yeah, I'm back on. I'm trying to see if I can share my whole screen.
Not seen it yet.
How about now?
You're live. Oh, wow, your screen's very wide.
I do have a wide screen. So unfortunately, I'm only showing one of my terminal windows, but that's okay. So here we have I got the indexer CLI going here. This is my testnet indexer. I'm sure you're all familiar with the status command. I'm just going to run that to get some of my basic data here. So you can see I have a bunch of indexer rules set up. I already have a bunch of allocations running and open and deployment syncing. And I'll just show you guys some of my commands to interact with the action queue. So what I can do is do some querying of the action queue to see what's going on there right now. So I'm going to query the action queue for any queued actions. So queued actions will be anything I already identified by the agent as ready for execution. So it looks like the agent has added 3 reallocate actions to the queue. Those are there and they're queued and they're waiting for my approval. So let's see, to take those actions, I can approve them. And I can do that by simply supplying the action IDs. So now those actions are approved. Once they're approved, there's a polling job by the worker that will pick them up. But I can also force execution by telling it to execute all approved actions. And there we go. So they were not successful, but that's not too much of a surprise. My graph node is a bit behind here. So as you can see, these transactions did not actually execute because there were not POIs available for those start blocks. So what I could then do is supply a 0 POI if I wanted to close it out manually, of course, or simply wait for those POIs to be available as the subgraph syncs. Another thing I can show you is how to manually add actions to the queue. So I'm going to check out my queued actions again, and
I have a
it's added
question
those.
for
Yeah, please.
the for when you're going to approve those actions by IDs, can there be a way to like approve everything? As
Yeah,
in,
I haven't added that. I typically try not to have those kind of easy to mess up actions where it may like get you into a place where you're not looking at each one before you're approving it. But in my working with the backstop indexers where we have hundreds of allocations, it's been a little bit annoying. So I think that might be worth adding. But I have, Bash is pretty powerful. So you can do things like here, I can approve a series of IDs by using this command. So this would approve 112 through 131. So there's some convenience functions available in Bash, but I do think like an approve all could be a reasonable addition.
yeah, +1 to that.
Yeah, so I'm going to add a action manually to the queue. So graph index or actions, and then I'm going to queue an allocate action. Let's get this subgraph ID here. So I tell it I'm going to queue an allocate action. I give it the deployment ID and then the amount to allocate. And that'll add that action to the queue. So the action queue is useful both for monitoring and approving actions from the agent, but you can also use it in this manual format to add allocation closes, reallocates, whatever you want to manually do. So you don't have to go through the rules anymore to do that. And then a nice thing there is if you're doing this manually, it'll automatically create a rule after you do it. So for instance, in this case, I'm allocating to this deployment. Once it completes that allocation transaction, it'll create a rule saying decision basis equals always for that deployment, so that the agent will then manage that allocation moving forward.
Will it also be the case for unallocating? For example, when you set unallocate and then will it set decision basis to never?
Yes.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
And was there a question that came through in the chat? I can't see the chat. So, and if any questions come through, feel free to verbally
Yeah, Vince
share them
from
with me.
Notify asked if it would be possible to add something like graph indexer unallocated to see if there's available stake or adding it to the status.
Yeah, I think that would be super useful to see how much free stake there is, so you can figure out what your allocation amounts are going to be.
Hey, speaking of graph indexer status, Ford, there was a bug at some point that if you had no start block for some subgraphs, it will just stop working. Was that fixed in V20? Because it's not an easy way to test it out.
I don't think that fix got into V20, but it is in a PR right now.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, that can be a pain when the status command doesn't return. Also, I'm seeing a question about off-chain subgraphs. Those still work in the same way. Using indexing rules, you can define off-chain subgraphs by setting a rule with off-chain equals true. I think that's how you do it. but the action queue currently is not set up to handle any deployment management or off-chain subgraphs, just allocations.
Would setting subgraphs through the environment variable still work? Because I forgot, but I think it does so on V20.
Yeah, you can still provide an array of off-chain subgraphs when you start up the agent.
Yeah, please don't change that.
Manage it through the rules. Either way is up to you.
Awesome. Please don't change that because it's a lifesaver. The script that I wrote for 𝗨𝘀𝗲𝗂 that plugs it into the stat file is great.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so I think that's kind of the quick demo I was planning on showing. Let me stop my stream here. And you can see in that subgraph I shared examples of this multi-call. So you can see like how many actions were bundled, what type of actions were bundled. And so far, I haven't really hit an obvious limit on how many can be bundled in one transaction. I've done up to, I think, 250 unallocates, reallocates in one transaction and got a pretty significant gas reduction. But I talked to Ariel a bit, and he said that there was no feasible limit. You could do thousands of allocation actions in a single transaction.
Isn't the limit basically the gas limit for the block itself? Because I think that's
yeah, and I think he said it would be like 10,000 allocation changes or something like that we're really not going to hit in any short term. So push on that on testnet. I'd love to find the limits, but I don't think we're going to hit the limits right now.
10,000 gas or 10,000 transactions? Hopefully 10,000 transactions, because 10,000 gas doesn't get you to the store anymore.
No, one single transaction, 10,000, for instance, close allocations.
Oh my God, that's outstanding.
Little inflation.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, Chris.
All right, yeah, I was able to get through that pretty quickly. So I have an initial implementation of that. I would love it if anyone can test this on testnet, or I've seen, I think, 1 or 2 indexers have upgraded on mainnet. I'm trying to monitor that. And I am setting up an issue in the indexer repo to track any other usability improvements. So there's been some good suggestions here I'll add there, and we can get a little list going. But it's been working super well for me so far, just with some small usability things. For instance, being able to approve all actions in one, just using approve all, things like that.
Amazing work, Word. Yeah, that's definitely something that I personally have been waiting for a long time. So yeah, that's amazing. But speaking of that, I do have a question. If I recall correctly, the networks.md file also still suggests using 18 point something version. Are we going to switch to 19 anytime soon, or do we skip 19 and move straight to 20 whenever that's ready?
I think we just skipped to 20, but I think 19.3, I could easily change that right now and suggest that. But I think it's worth moving straight to 20 if people are going to be upgrading in the near term, because you'll save a lot of gas and I think also get some pretty huge quality of life improvements.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It would be better to push the V20 because it's like so much better than everything else.
Yep. I got a question in the chat from Derek. He's actually asking about the history of the queue. So yeah, using the indexer CLI, you can query for failed or successful actions in the queue. So you can do indexer actions get status failed or status success. And if it's a failed transaction, as I showed in the demo pretty quickly, you may not have noticed, but there includes a failure reason. So the indexer agent error message will then get included in the database, so you can then track, why your actions failed, and then maybe re-add them to the queue with different parameters. For instance, in my case, I didn't have a POI available, so maybe if I really wanted to close that, I would add an action to the queue that says unallocate with a 0 POI and force equals true.
So Ford, for those of us cowboys that like to go for the newest and shiniest things, can you link us to that issue so that we can track any things that we might run into as we run it in production?
Yep, I have a list in Notion. I'm going to be throwing that into an issue right after this, and I'll link it to you.
Awesome, thank you.
And as always, I super appreciate anyone trying it out and giving me feedback and suggestions so we can improve this with a short feedback loop.
Hey, Ford. Awesome. Super awesome release. Derek had a question in the chat, which was, do we have an easy way to look at historical queue, actions successful and actions unsuccessful for troubleshooting purposes?
I feel that I just answered that one. Was the answer not sufficient?
That might have been my bad. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah. And like I said, you can query for failed and successful actions. And for failed ones, you can see why they failed. But I think there's definitely some additional control I would like to add. So, looking at only the failed transactions in the last hour, because, this list is going to maybe build up over time. Just giving more control over how you filter the queue.
That would be amazing. And also, can you also view like the whole history? Let's say not filtered by the status, but like just printed in the order of execution.
You can get all actions in the queue, but there is not currently a command that just gives you a history of each batch, but that's a good one to add as well. And of course, you can always go directly to the database and write SQL queries to filter and group and show summaries by status and type of action, as is right now. And we'll try to add that functionality into the CLI as well. And then something coming down the pipeline pretty soon, once we stabilize this, is a GUI interface. So you'll be able to go through your browser, view your actions, make changes, and we'll have a more rich filtering and interaction there.
Hell yeah, dude. Let's do that. That would be amazing. Like, I've been waiting for this for such a long time.
That's awesome. I had one question as far as, well, you said it keeps history of previous actions. How long does that history go back? And if it only goes back to a certain degree or a certain point in time, is there any sort of automatic pruning or anything that happens?
There is no pruning right now. So currently the goal is to just have everything in that database table. And it could grow pretty large over time, but we'll have a bunch of filtering mechanisms so you can, for instance, only see failed transactions for the last week, things like that, because it will get a bit unwieldy.
It would be nice to implement some. The way I view those action queue is like some kind of like Docker logs, for example, where you can like see everything that happens as time passed. So you can probably implement something like -n100, and it shows the last 100 lines basically of logs. That would be one way of implementing it, I guess, and a simple one.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
And then with any successful actions, it includes the transaction ID.
Oh
So
wow,
then
that's super helpful.
So then you can just pull that up in Etherscan or whatever your favorite block explorer or debugger is to see what's going on there. So yeah, it should really help with going back through and debugging, why something failed or whether or not it was successful, rather than having to parse through logs.
I have a question. What if the transaction is successful? Sorry, what if the action queue is successful, so that it does send a transaction on the network, but the transaction failed for whatever reason? How would the action queue count that? Is it a failed or an approved, like a successful queue, action queue, whatever?
That would result in it being failed. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I haven't seen that happen too much. One thing I've done here is separated out preparation of all data for the actions and the actual execution. So it goes through anything in the batch. It prepares like POIs, checks with the contracts, make sure there already isn't an existing allocation if we're trying to allocate, and does all the double checking. And then it bundles it up into a transaction, and then a separate step it sends that transaction. Because of that separation now, it's been a little hard for me to get at the failed transaction itself. So ideally, we're failing early before it's ever sending a transaction, but we'll try to find any cases where transactions fail and work through those.
That's awesome.
And one thing we're doing to help with that, like sometimes an issue is free stake. So when we're bundling the transactions, we're making sure that any unallocated actions are coming before an allocate action, so we're freeing up stake and trying to avoid any ordering issues there and getting ahead of that.
That's brilliant. Oh, one more thing I just remember. There was someone, I think, like besides me, also Protofire had this issue some time ago when it was querying for the rebates or something. It was crashing the or actually it was just erroring in the indexer service or agent. You know, like I can't really remember that bug, but do you know if it's fixed?
Well, there are a few things. There's the max body size on the gateway for collecting receipts for vouchers.
There was something
There's
with a query with greater than something. That's what all I remember.
Oh yes, yeah. So Hope pushed a fix in for that. It was kind of a weird issue where the runtime didn't seem to have the type managed correctly. And we added an extra check there that I originally wouldn't have thought necessary, but we're hoping that will fix it. That PR has been merged, and I'm gonna try to do a release this week with that.
That's awesome. Let me know when that's released, because I really want to upgrade on our production environment to see if that fixes it.
Yeah, no problem. There will be a few other nice things in there. One thing that Hope added, which will be, I think, hopefully used pretty heavily, is a global cost model. So that allows you to set a global default cost model that your service will fall back to if you don't have a specific deployment level cost model
Oh
set.
my God! Finally.
Yes. Excellent.
Was it
That's super
hard?
nice.
Was it hard to implement that? Because we've been asking for this for like, I don't know, a year and a half now. So yeah, thank you so much, Hope.
I wouldn't say it was like, she can probably speak to that. I wouldn't say it was a super hard feature to add, but it wasn't the highest priority, and we'll be glad to have it in though. Yeah, so we had the gateways updated, so they kind of had a fallback, but now you have control over what your default fallback price is, which is super nice for you.
Yeah, this would be something like everyone is going to use this. It's probably why most of indexers that weren't setting those cost models. I know I'm not setting those because like I was like we have the top 200 subgraphs synced, and we just allocate to whatever it's profitable, right? And having to like manually add 200 lines every now and then in the database, it was like such a pain in the ass. I would just not do it at all. So this is so much
So now you
convenient now.
just so yeah, once that's in, you'll just need to set you can set whatever cost model by using a CLI command, or you can set a file in your base directory that's default.agora, and the agent will just automatically pick that up if you have it there.
Hell yeah.
Nice, yeah.
This is awesome.
Hope is sharing the PR in the chat, so you guys can check that out. I think it includes the usage instructions, so you can see what the UX is like.
I have a question on that PR actually. How does it handle variables for the global model?
So I think what happens is when there's a request for a deployment specific cost model, if there is no cost model for that specific deployment, what it'll do is grab the default cost model and it'll, I believe, automatically put in that deployment ID so it becomes a specific cost model and then return it to the gateway. So you can use whatever variables in that cost model as you would in a specific one. It works in the same way. It just does a quick deployment ID replacement.
Cool. Is there any way to set global variables that would apply to all?
No, I don't think so. There's like the die variable, I think, that's built in, but
Yeah.
I don't think you can arbitrarily just create global variables that will be picked up by all deployments. But you can set this fallback cost model, which
Yeah,
I think typically would just be a pretty simple one. Like it's hard to make one that includes structure for all the different types of deployments.
Mm-hmm. I do think that it makes sense to be able to set global variables with the ability to set like local deployment overrides. Like for example, you might have a variable. So you have like a global cost model that kind of encapsulates, the way that you model, your costs relative to input variables. And then you might have like a variable that is quite deployment specific, like some measure of the indexing cost, how computationally intensive it is. But then you might also have a variable that kind of represents like your total system load. And yeah, you would obviously update that on a global basis. It wouldn't really be a subgraph specific or deployment specific thing.
Yeah, I could see that being a huge value add. Some of that work, the semiotic team has been doing some research there. I don't know if you guys have heard of the Auto Agora tool. That does automatic cost model creation. Right now, the way it works, it's pretty simple. It's we're calling a price bandit. So it kind of scans through different prices to try to find the optimal price for a subgraph. But they're also doing work to predict what the cost of a query will be. And then once they have that further along, you could put in some sort of global variables like your system costs or what an estimate for compute on a query might be, and then it can use the model that they're creating to model the cost of a query, and then using your cost that you put in as a global default, then come out with a price that you should set. So there is some pretty exciting work going on there with automatically creating cost models for you.
Speaking of that, Kai, I have a question for you, since you're with Semiotic. Maybe you're involved in that as well. So, will the Auto Agora also look onto other people's cost models and try to make something out of that? Because all the cost models are public on their status API, and I think it was status API or /cost or something like that. but yeah, I guess you can take advantage of that of some sorts.
Yeah, right now the 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗧 tool is using the feedback from the gateway, so it'll change the price for deployment. It'll take some time to see how that has affected the query volume that it's getting. So, maybe you raise it too high and that reduces the query volume you get from the gateway. And then it'll react to that and then lower the price. It's not going out to the whole network and getting everyone's cost models and comparing right now. That's certainly something we could talk about adding. I think that's a lot of complexity. Maybe Kai could speak to it a little more.
Yeah, so as far as, well, basically what everyone else is saying is correct. Right now, it's just an adversarial relationship between the gateway and your indexer. As far as how complex it would be to try and feed all the cost models into 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗧, well, for one, we'd have to be able to discover all indexers that exist, which I think is doable because you just have everybody's stake and everybody's allocation.
You have everyone's endpoints basically on the. So
Yeah.
when you set up an indexer, you get that you get to submit a transaction that's including the URL of your indexer basically on the actual blockchain, so you can easily query that through the subgraph.
And so that's all available in the network subgraph today, which is nice. I don't know what it would take as far as complexity goes. Alexis at Semiotic could speak to that. Hypothetically, if everybody was using 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗧 today, it would probably not add much conceptual complexity, but the execution of it would be quite a bit more complex because you'd have to scrape thousands or a handful of backends anyway in order to determine it for that particular subgraph. But we do this for every single subgraph that you're allocated on. So if you're allocated to 100 subgraphs, for instance, you'll have to scrape the endpoint for everybody who's allocated to that subgraph and active on that subgraph. So you're looking at thousands of scrapes of, several dozen or potentially 100 endpoints across the world. So, yeah.
And that's basically what the gateway already does. So we're kind of leveraging the gateway to be part of the feedback loop here, rather than trying to recreate what the gateway is doing. And then, we're just kind of getting the response from the ISA, which is the indexer selection algorithm in the gateway.
Exactly. And to echo what Chris said, the 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗧 system is really about setting the price. It's not about costs. And so it's more about price discovery, and that's really what we're after here.
And I think there's a totally kind of independent stream of work around that's I feel like talking about 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗧 in the context of cost models is kind of a misnomer. Like it's not about cost at all. And you could have 𝗨𝗂𝗂𝗧 determining optimal market price, but then as a completely separate set of concerns, you can develop cost models that more accurately reflect the underlying cost structures of serving those queries. So it's kind of like the 𝗨𝗂𝗂𝗧 setting price gives you your top line, and cost models allow you to compress your bottom line, right? Like you can effectively extract more margin out of a query by using a cost model that more accurately reflects your cost inputs. But it is different than price.
Do we gonna call that GEV instead of MEV? Graph extracted value?
Sure, why not?
Kai, how ready is the 𝗨𝗂𝗧 tool? Like, did you guys manage to, like, I know Alexei was saying that he was waiting for something to be implemented, I think, in the indexer service before it's actually ready to go. Do you know if that's still the case?
It is. We're still waiting on a patch to be applied to the indexer service. In our in our test environment, we have the indexer service patched so that way we can do the price discovery. Because what we do is we instrument the indexer service such that any queries, such that query volume and what query shape actually gets executed on the query nodes is relayed back to a processor that begins the magic of discovering the price.
Yeah, so that's on main right now. It's not in a release yet, I don't think. But yeah, and just to summarize what that does is it adds logs with the query times. So in your indexer service now, you'll be able to look at your logs if you turn that on and see the times for all the queries going through. There's also an additional Prometheus metric, so you can add to your dashboards a monitor for query times like per subgraph and things like that.
Oh, you guys pulled that over to Prometheus? Nice. I'm gonna add that to my dashboard.
I believe so, yeah. So that is a nice quality of life improvement that is separate from 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗧. But yeah, you can have some nice dashboards with query prices over time and volume and latency.
So is it actually merged into main right now, or is it still pending an PR?
It is on main, yeah.
Oh, so it will be included with the next release, I guess.
Yep.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to test that.
Yeah, as far as the 𝗨𝗂𝗂𝗧 stuff goes, we are working on re-implementing certain sections of it. We had the entire code base written in Python. We're rewriting it in Golang, so that way it's a little bit more performant and doesn't chew down quite as many system resources.
And then there's a lot of testing that we want to do on that feature. So we're going to try to get people using that on testnet. We've tested it on some indexers. It seems to have worked quite well, but it sort of remains to be seen if, say, hundreds of indexers are all using this price bandit and they're interacting with each other, what that's going to look like on the network. So we want to do some integration testing there.
Okay, well, I'll take the opportunity to wrap then. I just want to thank Ford, Eva, and Adam for all of their contributions and for all of you for joining today. This was a very informative and quite hilarious episode. I really enjoyed all the reactions that everyone had for all of the updates. And so I think this episode is worthy of a POAP. And so to that, we do have one. The code is 𝗨𝗏𝗀𝗀, all lowercase with dashes in between. I know sometimes folks can misunderstand me, so I will just paste it here and then delete it shortly after. So yeah, if you want to copy and paste that into the POAP app, you can get your POAP for today. One thing that I'll suggest before we wrap is perhaps maybe to loop back on this subject in the next IOH. So just a teaser for all of you who are going to be with us next week. It's going to be about the automated allocation optimizer, and perhaps we could have a short section next week where we invite Ford again, and folks who are in this group who have used ActionQ can maybe share some thoughts from using it, maybe share feedback and kind of continue the conversation. So yeah, thank you all. This was an amazing episode. I certainly enjoyed it. I hope you guys did too. And we look forward to seeing you all next week. We hope you have a good week. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
See you guys. Take it easy.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey guys, thanks.